eine Zerreißung unserer Luftwaffe, Zerreißung unserer Panzerverbände, wir gerade dabei waren. A very serious danger, perhaps the most serious one. Its whole extent we can only now judge. We did not ourselves understand just how strong the state was armed.
No, we hadn't thought of this.
No, I too know.
During the Winter War, we had not even thought of this,
yes.
Of course. But so, how they, in reality, and now there is no doubt all they had, what they had in their stocks.
Absolutely. They have the most immense armaments that people could imagine. Well, if somebody had told me that a country with somebody had told me a nation could start with 35,000 tanks, and I'd have said, "You're crazy." 35,000 tanks. We have destroyed, right now, more than 34,000 tanks. If someone had told me this, I'd have said, if you're one of my generals had stated that any nation has 35,000 tanks, I'd have said, "You, my good sir, you see everything twice or 10 times. You are crazy, you see ghosts." This I would have deemed possible. I told you earlier we found factories, one of them at Kramatorskaja, for example. 2 years ago there were just a couple hundred. We didn't know anything. Today there is a tank plant where during the first shift a little more than 30,000, and round the clock a little more than 60,000 workers would have labored a single tank plant, a gigantic factory. Masses of workers who certainly lived like animals, and in the Donetsk area.
Well, if you keep in mind they had almost 20 years, almost 25 years of freedom to arm themselves.
It's unbelievable.
And everything spent on armament.
Only on armament.
Only on armament.
Only where it is. As I told you, President, before, I had no idea of it. If I had an idea, then I would have been more difficult for me, but I would have taken the decision to invade anyhow, because there was no other possibility. It was certain already in the winter of 39-40 that the war had to begin. I had only this nightmare, but there is even more, because a war on two fronts would have been impossible. It would have broken us. Today, we see more clearly than we saw at that time. It would have broken us, and I originally wanted to, already in the fall of 39, I wanted to conduct a campaign in the West. On the continuously bad weather we experienced hindered us. Our whole armament, is a pure good weather armament. It is very capable, very good, but it is unfortunately just a good weather armament. We have seen this in the war. Our weapons naturally were made for the West, and we all thought, and this was true until that time, it was the opinion from the earliest times, you cannot wage war in winter. And we too have German tanks. They weren't tested, for example, to prepare them for a winter war. Instead, we conducted trials to prove it was impossible to wage war in winter. That is a different starting point. In the autumn of 1939, we always faced the question, I desperately wanted to attack, and I firmly believed we could finish France in 6 weeks. However, we faced the question of whether we could move at all. It was raining continuously. And I know the French area myself very well, and I too could not ignore the opinions of many of my generals that probably would not have had that our tank arm would not have been effective, that our air force could not have been effective from our airfields because of the rain. I know northern France myself. I served in the Great War for 4 years, so the delay happened. If I had in 1939 eliminated France, then world history would have changed. But I had to wait until 1940, and unfortunately, it wasn't possible before May. Only on the 10th of May was the first nice day, and on the 10th of May I immediately attacked. I gave the order to attack on the 10th, on the 8th, and then we had to conduct this huge transfer of our divisions from the west to the east. First the occupation of, then we had the task in Norway. The same time we faced, I can frankly say it today, a great misfortune, namely the weakness of Italy, because of first the situation in North Africa, then second because of the situation in Albania, Greece, a very big misfortune, we had to help. This meant for us, with one small stroke first, splitting of our air force, splitting our tank force, while at the same time we were preparing the tank arm in the east. We had to hand over, with one stroke, 2 divisions, 2 whole divisions, and a third was then added, and we had to replace continuous, very severe losses there. It was bloody fighting in the desert. This all naturally was inevitable, you see. I had a conversation with Molotov at that time, and it was absolutely certain that Molotov departed with the decision to begin a war. And I dismissed the decision to begin a war. I dismissed him with the decision impossible to forestall him. This was the only, because the demands that man brought up were clearly aimed to rule Europe in the end. Then I have him, publicly. Already in the fall of 1940, we continuously faced the question, shall we consider a breakup? At that time, I advised the Finnish government to negotiate and to gain time and to act dilatory in this matter, because I always feared that Russia suddenly would attack Romania in the late fall and occupy the petroleum wells, and we would have not been ready in the late fall of 1940. If Russia indeed had taken Romanian petroleum wells, then Germany would have been lost. It would have required just 60 Russian divisions to handle that matter. In Romania, we had, of course, at that time, no major units. The Romanian government had turned to us only recently, and what we did have there was laughable. They only had to occupy the petroleum wells. Of course, with our weapons, I could not start a war in September or October. That was out of the question. Naturally, transfer to the east wasn't that far advanced yet. Of course, the units first had to reconsolidate in the west. First, the armaments had to be taken care of, because we too had, we also had losses in our campaign in the west. It would have been impossible to attack before the spring of 1941. And if the Russians at that time, in the fall of 1940, had occupied Romania, taken the petroleum wells, then we would have been helpless in 1941.
Without petroleum.
We had huge German production. However, the demands of the Air Force, our panzer divisions, they are really huge. It is a level of consumption that surpasses the imagination. And without the addition of 4 to 5 million tons of Romanian petroleum, we could not have fought the war and would have had to let it be. And that was my big worry. Therefore, I aspired to bridge the period of negotiations till we would be strong enough to counter those extortive demands from Moscow. Because those demands were simply naked extortions. They were extortions. The Russians knew we were tied up in the West. They could really extort everything from us. Only when Molotov visited. Then, I told him frankly that the demands, their numerous demands, weren't acceptable to us. With that, the negotiations came to an abrupt end that same morning. There were 4 topics. The one topic that involved Finland was the freedom to protect themselves from the Finnish threat, he said. You do not want to tell me Finland threatens you. But he said, in Finland, it is they who take action against the friends of the Soviet Union. They would take action against society, against us. They would continuously persecute us, and a great power cannot be threatened by a minor country. I said, your existence isn't threatened by Finland. That is, you don't mean to tell me that your existence is threatened by Finland. Well, there was a moral threat being made against a great power, and what Finland was doing, that was a threat to their moral existence. Then I told him we would not accept a further war in the Baltic area as passive spectators. In reply, he asked me how we viewed our position in Romania. We had given them a guarantee. He wanted to know if that guarantee was directed against Russia as well. And that time I told him, I don't think it is directed at you, because I don't think you have the intention of attacking Romania. You have always stated that Bessarabia is yours, but that you have never stated that you want to attack Romania. Yes, he told me, but he wanted to know more precisely if this guarantee